295. Now, there's been a bit of a public flogging taking place this week over tax. It has been entirely reciprocal. When it came out that former Tory party treasurer and donor Lord Fink had an account with the Swiss arm of HSBC, Ed Miliband went to town on him and on David Cameron in the House of Commons.
He's banged to rights, just like his donors. And doesn't this all sound familiar? The Prime Minister appoints someone to a senior job in government. There are public allegations, but he doesn't ask the questions. He turns a blind eye.
Well, a load of catcalling has ensued over the week, but Lord Fink finally spoke to the Evening Standard, saying that what he did was at the vanilla end of tax avoidance, and everyone does it to some degree. So is he right? Does everyone seek to minimise their tax? And is there anything wrong with that, so long as it is within legal boundaries? 0500 92 95 00, as ever, is the number. What about the tradesman who does a few jobs for cash? Is that any better or worse or more acceptable than the multi-millionaire who makes use of offshore accounts or the other many means there are of avoiding tax, which is, of course, legal as opposed to tax evasion, which is illegal? Well, we're joined by Jonathan Davis, wealth manager and economist, and Robin McAlpine, director of Commonweal. Good morning, Jonathan and Robin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Jonathan, first, is Lord Fink right? Does everyone do it to some degree?
Well, I'm sure even BBC staff have invested in houses. They are tax-free savings as opposed to investing in other things which can be taxed. So absolutely, if you have spare money and you have an opportunity to save tax, you absolutely should do.
Right, so the vanilla end Lord Fink described his at, I mean, I presume you would say taking out an ISA would also be the vanilla end. What exactly was he doing?
Well, from what I gather, he was for a few years actually based in Switzerland, and he opened bank accounts in Switzerland. So therefore, he was effectively offshore and not paying much taxes in the UK.
Right.
Well, it seems entirely appropriate to me.
So you don't see anything wrong with that at all?
No.
No. Robin?
Well, the problem with this is, first of all, I don't actually think everybody avoids tax. Lots of people just work and they do pay, their tradesmen properly and all these sorts of things. And I do accept that probably more people have been involved in some sort of tax avoidance than they might be aware of. Like I say, you paid cash for a tradesman, you probably have avoided some tax. Now, of course, it would be better if we didn't all do it. But there's a big category of difference here between people who cheat the system a bit and people who actively corrupt the system. And the problem with too many of the big corporations, too many of the big accountancy firms, and many of the very rich, is they don't just dodge tax. They are actively involved in changing the tax system to create more dodges. And this is the problem that we've got. We've got the leakiest tax system probably in the developed world, in Britain. And it's a result of the rich not only dodging tax, but believing that it's endemically okay and trying to change the system so they can dodge it even more. And that's really the biggest problem that we've got.
Yeah, but with that distinction, we'll talk about that, but coming back to that distinction that you make about, maybe a tradesman who takes cash or you pay cash, or people who are self-employed, who are running small businesses, seeking to minimise their tax liability. Do you have as much of a problem with that or not? Because are we not all equal before the law?
If you take steps to minimise your tax, if they are legal, then there's not much that anybody can really say about it, because what we've done is we've created a legal system that enables that to happen. I don't necessarily think it's good. It just puts pressure on the NHS, and the question is, should it have been legal? And if it's illegal, this is the cash for service. If it's illegal, we shouldn't be doing it. And again, even if it's fairly small scale, it just takes money away from hospitals, from schools, and it puts more pressure on the rest of us, of those who are paying their tax. But there's a difference between people who don't have much money, saving a little bit here and there through perhaps practices which are not exactly admirable, and the very rich who don't need to, who just endemically see avoiding their contribution to society as something that's almost a right.
Right.
And so there's no such thing as good cheating.
Right.
There's a kind of egregious cheating by those who've already got an enormous amount of wealth, which is just morally worse.
Okay. It is a bit of a moral maze, this one this morning, isn't it? Let's have your thoughts. 0500 92 95 00. Is there anything wrong with seeking to minimise your tax liability as long as it is within the law? But, you might be cheating a little bit. And we're using all these words here that are very difficult to define. And is it different if you are one of the super rich from somebody who's kind of scraping by a living like most folks? Bit of a nightmare, one would imagine, for Lord Fink this week. He's not had a good week. Huge political row surrounding the issue of tax liabilities, sparked by the discovery that he, a major party, Tory party donor and a former treasurer of the Conservative Party, held a bank account in the Swiss arm of HSBC, thereby reducing his tax liability in the UK. He says it's at the vanilla end of tax avoidance and everyone does it to some degree. So is there anything wrong with seeking to pay as little tax as possible? Jonathan Davis, wealth manager and economist, says if you've got an ISA, you're avoiding tax. Nothing wrong with minimising your tax bill. Robin McAlpine, director of Commonweal, says cheating is cheating and that's not good, but there is a difference between people on regular incomes, the self-employed tradesmen, for instance, and the super rich who are, as he says, actively corrupting the system. Let's speak to Tommy. Hi, Tommy.
Hi. Good morning.
Hi. What do you think? Any problem with trying to minimise your tax liability?
Well, my opinion is of these Torags, lords and all the rest of it is they actively employed firms of accountants and employed the help of banks to squirrel billions of pounds away in these accounts to avoid paying tax. It makes them no better than benefit cheats because they're actively cheating the system.
They're not doing anything illegal, though, Tommy.
Beg your pardon?
They're not doing anything illegal.
Well, that's a matter of opinion, isn't it?
Well, but the law shouldn't be a matter of opinion.
Well, it boils down to people's opinions at the end of the day. But the thing is, it could be made illegal. And for them to say it's not illegal is like saying, it's okay to go out pheasant shooting as long as you eat the birds,
Yeah. Well, Tommy, let's let Jonathan Davis respond to you on that. Jonathan, what do you think of Tommy's analysis of it?
I understand his concern. The fact is, since ancient Greece, the super rich, the ultra rich, have never really paid taxes. And the other chap, I think Mr. McAlpine, he's quite right in that the professionals lobby politicians, and politicians change the tax rules to suit the rich. The rich basically don't pay tax. The rest of us pay tax. We used to pay a lot of tax in the form of inflation, and anyone might want to just Google why inflation is the biggest tax there is, because it is. We don't have much inflation now, but essentially the middle classes are the people who pay the most percentage of their income as tax. Those earning between about, say, $40,000 a year and about $150,000 a year, which I can tell you in some parts is not a phenomenal amount of money. These are the people paying the bulk of their income as taxes.
So
those
would it be all right,
that,
Jonathan, for those to be minimising their tax?
Is it right for them to minimise it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I disagree with Mr. McAlpine that we should all pay as much tax as possible. On the contrary, we should pay as little tax as possible because the government does not know how most effectively to spend my money.
Right.
I know how most effectively to spend my money. I'd far rather have a local school and a local hospital, which I would pay into personally, and have a massive reduction in my income taxes, and then I would have far more control over what happens in my local education and local health, rather than have some central body put on management and management and management and perk after perk, and that gets away from actual healthcare and education. So no, I want to minimise my taxes, and I will do everything I possibly can to do so.
All right, okay, Jonathan. Tommy, is it the super rich that you have a particular issue with? I mean, Jonathan's talking about the bulk of the tax burden falls actually on the middle raft of earners, if you like. But I think he said between 40 or 50,000 and 150,000. Would you have a different view of that group of people seeking to minimise their tax than the ones who earn multi-millions?
I've never heard so much tripe in all my life talk that guy just said. But because the ancient Greeks didn't pay tax, it's all right for the millionaires now not to do it. Why don't they want to support?
I said that's what happens.
I've listened to you, but you kindly do the courtesy of listening to me. Now, I mean, why don't they? Why is it okay for millionaires to avoid paying taxes? Why we're not there to serve them?
But
why
Tommy,
don't they want to support their country?
Tommy, is it right for anyone to try and avoid taxes?
No, it's really is not. Everybody should pay their share.
So let's take an example of, and I shouldn't be picking on tradesmen. I don't mean to be. It's just a very easy example. Self-employed people who are not PAYE, who might have the opportunity, if you like, to do a job for cash, or just to sort of sort their accounts in such a way that they are tax efficient, which is another word that you use. Is there anything different from that than somebody who's mega rich putting their money in various offshore accounts or some of these other schemes we've spoken about? Do you see a difference?
You're talking about a local tradesman maybe doing a wee job for £200 or £300 or something in his back pocket. You're talking about these multi-millionaires.
No. Okay, so Tommy, so that's okay, is it? The 200 or 300 quid?
No, I just point out the difference. I never said it was okay. I just said you're looking at these multi-millionaires who can easily afford to pay the taxes.
But I guess that is what I'm trying to get at, Tommy, and to get people's thoughts on. The number again, 0500 92 95 00. Given that we are supposed to all be equal before the law in every single way, should we be making a distinction between people who are dealing in 200 or 300 quid and people who are dealing in 200 or 300 million? Or should we say the law's the law, and as long as you stay inside it, regardless at what level you're operating, then that's the bottom line? Let's bring in Fergus Muirhead, who is a money expert. Hi there, Fergus.
Hi there.
Hi. Can you help us a bit with the definitions here? The words that I hear bandied about the most are tax evasion. That's illegal, yeah? Tax avoidance, you can define that for me, and tax efficiency.
Well, it's been fascinating listening to the last 10 or 15 minutes because there are so many terms that have been used badly. I mean, we talk about the tradesman, for example, who does a job for cash and puts £200 in his back pocket. That is quite clearly tax evasion. Now,
so that's illegal.
That's illegal. Whether you think it's right or wrong that a tradesman who's a small tradesman that earns a couple of £100 should be allowed to do that or not is not the question. Under current legislation, you can't earn money, put it in your back pocket and not tell the Inland Revenue you've earned it. That is tax evasion and that's illegal. Whereas squirreling away billions of pounds in a bank account that's called tax avoidance at the moment is legal. And therefore there's nothing legally wrong with that. Now again, I'm not making a moral judgment of whether that is morally right or morally wrong. Mm-hmm. But tax evasion is not telling the revenue about money that you've earned, and that's illegal. Tax avoidance is about arranging your affairs in such a way, as Jonathan was talking about, that you pay as little tax as possible.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of the confusion is coming from at the moment. Because sorry, on you go.
You go, Fergus.
I was going to say at a very simple level, if I take some money out of a current account or a savings account I've got and I put it into an ISA, I'll pay less tax. If I take money out of a current account and I put it into a pension, I'll pay less tax. So at a very simple level, that's tax avoidance. But nobody is saying that I shouldn't be able to contribute to an ISA or to a pension in a year because that's tax efficient for me to do that.
Right.
The problem is with the law that you can't have a law that says that tax avoidance is okay and then say, well, people shouldn't really do it. Because if it's okay, if it's legal, it's legal. Mm-hmm. And if it's illegal, it's illegal. And if we've got a problem with some of these schemes, some of these high-end schemes where people are saving millions and billions of pounds not avoiding tax, then the government has a duty to look at these things and say, let's make these things illegal. And then if they are illegal, we'll prosecute the people involved because they're breaking the law.
So in just to clarify again then, so in terms of the eyes of the law, putting your money into an ISA or a pension fund, as you say, to be tax efficient is technically avoiding tax. Is that more or less the same thing as what Lord Fink is doing by having money in a Swiss bank account?
Well, it's more or less the same thing in the sense that he is not paying tax that he otherwise would have paid if he'd done something else with the money.
Right, okay.
So it's avoiding tax in that sense. It gets slightly more complicated, okay, because the revenue also advise UK residents to look out for warning signs when they get involved in some of these schemes. Because what they say is that some schemes that are avoidance are only set up to avoid tax and therefore they're not right.
Right.
But it's a very grey area, and to me, if the revenue is an issue with that, then they should be speaking to the government, and the government should be saying these things need to become illegal and need to become tax evasion.
Right, okay. He described it as the vanilla end of tax avoidance. I'm interested as to what would be the dark chocolate end, but can you hold with us, Fergus, just for a second? Let's get some more thoughts on this. We've got Donald in Glasgow and Stephen in Dundee. Hi, Donald.
Hello there.
Hi.
Good morning.
Morning. What do you think, Donald?
Well, I've listened to all the speakers on there, and I've always had the opinion, what unfortunately we hear it in the media, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Now, who are the poor people in the middle? Are they the ones that are keeping the country going? Nobody sends us a wee memo to say, this is how you can avoid tax if you do this, if you do that. I was listening to your last call, I was saying, eyes, etc., etc. That's fair enough. You're beating the benefit. You know, you're getting a better benefit from one company to another, which is only right. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, to me, it's in the middle of the road people that are keeping this country going. And when it comes to billionaires having all this, and parliamentarians especially, all parties who are kidding us on here. I mean, I'm not a party political guy, I hate them, but I'll be honest with that, because they're all in for themselves. And they're all arguing like idiots over a counter there in the Parliament yesterday about who's paid them what and who avoided tax. What a state we are in. God bless the people in the middle.
You sound as if you're despairing, Donald. You really do.
God bless the people in the middle that pay their taxes.
Yeah, okay, Donald, thanks. Stephen's in Dundee. Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Hi. What do you think? Anything wrong with trying to minimise your tax? I mean, we've already explored here. This is very, very complicated. And whether you take a legal judgment or you take a moral judgment, you know, where do you come into it?
Well, I would just like to point out the tradesman, because your other speaker there seems to be sort of stoning over the real issue. I'm just going to skip back again, sorry. Right, a tradesman who's maybe pocketing £300, right, cannot afford to pay a lobbyist, just like what your other caller was saying before. And he hit the nail on the head with this, and people need to really understand it's down to the lobbyists. These rich people and rich companies pay lobbyists to get the government to change the tax laws so they can dodge the tax, right? Now, I don't have a couple £100,000 to go and get the law changed so I could dodge tax, or anybody else in the middle band. People need to stop looking down at the people below them and saying, you're a benefit cheat, you're taking money, you're on blah, 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 rubbish. You need to start looking above you. It's the people at the top that are skimming all the time, and they're using legal loopholes. They're basically paying to change the law. Right, so just because they pay to change the law, does that make it right? Just because it says it's legal in a term does not mean to say anymore that it's legal. Yeah. It's just as illegal as someone putting the money in their pocket. The only difference is there's a bit of paper signed off by the corrupt government, pretty much, stealing for themselves and their buddies.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly, what's going on?
That may well be going on. Jonathan Davis, you suggested that is going on, that political lobbying. So absolutely, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about right now, Stephen, and that we don't know who is lobbied in or not. We have got a tax system as it exists at the moment, whether it's open to influence or not.
That's the fundamental root of the problem. That's the root of the problem. If they weren't, listen, you know something, if your combined wealth is over, say, £300,000, you should not be allowed to be a member of Parliament, period. Because if you've made your millions and you're a millionaire, then you're privileged enough to have made those millions and be rich. You're not then privileged enough for us to serve you. Right? You've made your millions, right? Off you pop, because you're no longer interested in the people at the bottom. You don't know what it's like to live at the bottom, right? The thing is, people at the bottom are scrimping and scraping to get money together, and this likes of this Lord guy who probably dodges millions, right?
millions of pounds.
Well,
right?
we have to be
It's
really careful in what we say here, Stephen. I mean, in terms of Lord Fink's tax affairs, we don't know exactly. We've had this revelation that he's had money in his Swiss bank account. We don't know anymore, so we can't be accusing people of illegal activities. But you clearly have a real distrust of people who are earning over a certain amount of money, and you feel there's going to be a disconnect between them and the people that they're representing, yeah?
Absolutely. They don't know what it's like to live in our world. I mean, these people...
But Robin, it's a big... sorry, not Stephen, sorry. It's a big thing that you're saying, that once people get into a certain wealth bracket, then they become disconnected from the rest of society. They become almost intrinsically untrustworthy, and they're not going to represent people who don't earn so much. Is that what you're saying? Yeah?
Me?
Stephen.
Yeah, I'm definitely saying that. Yeah. Honestly,
I'm just going to chuck that out there for people, because I think that's a really interesting thought to go on. 0500 92 95 00. Do you, once you get into the higher wealth brackets, become so disconnected and so protective of your own interests that you just cannot genuinely represent people who don't have the same kind of wealth factor? Robin McAlpine, what do you think of that?
I don't think people understand how endemic this is. So let me
No,
tell
but can I ask you what you think of that specific point?
About whether, the problem of people with too much money,
yeah,
the only people that make laws. It is one of the single biggest problems that we have in our society just now. That is, every single elected politician in Britain below, outside of local authorities, is in the top 5% of the richest people in the population. Simply
right.
An MP's salary puts you in the richest 5%. It is very difficult if you are among the rich all the time to really properly empathise with people whose lives you don't see. It is a massive problem. I actually think that the separation of our policymakers, of our politicians, from the experience of so many people in our society may be the single biggest problem of our politics just now. So I could not agree with that more. If you can't feel like the people you're governing, you won't do it well.
Okay. Well, it's a wee bit of a tangent or a discussion, but as I say, I think it's a really interesting one. Let me know your thoughts. 0500 92 95 00 is the number. Just back to tax. And Fergus Muirhead, I know you've got to go. Can I ask you just this one last question? We're talking about the vanilla end of tax avoidance, which Lord Fink was the phrase that he employed. And the phrase that I'm employing is, what is the dark chocolate end of tax avoidance?
Well, it was interesting listening to Jonathan earlier talking about what's been going on since ancient Greece. We can't run a society unless people take responsibility for paying tax somewhere down the line. We can't do the things, the government can't pay for the things it needs to pay for if nobody's paying tax. Vanilla and dark chocolate, the vanilla end is the ISAs and the pensions that we talked about. The dark chocolate end is the people that are saving literally millions and in some cases billions of pounds, both as individuals and corporations.
By doing what?
By arranging their affairs in such a way that they don't pay tax, and whether that's an ISA or a pension at the vanilla end to Swiss bank accounts and all sorts of complicated film partnerships and other sorts of things at the other end.
The Gary Barlow thing.
The Gary Barlow type thing,
right.
where people are investing money in things that are losing money only for the sake of paying tax. And that in itself is a really complicated thing. I know people who have invested in film partnerships because they're involved in the film and TV industry and who genuinely think that they're doing something to help promote the TV and film industry. And the revenue have basically said, one particular case I've been looking at recently, the revenue have insisted that this guy gives them £100,000 in case they find against the company. Now that's the only area in law where there's a presumption of guilt.
Right.
What they're then saying is, if we find in a couple of years' time that the company had done something genuine and they were actually involved in a proper film partnership to make a movie that was making money, then we'll give you your money back. But in the meantime, this guy's got to go and find £100,000. Now, he invested in that scheme because he was involved in the business. But it goes back to what I said earlier, that we're in this kind of quagmire of nobody really knows what's going on because it's such a grey area. And we've got members of the Houses of Parliament and Lords talking about vanilla ends and you're talking about dark chocolate ends, and it's all really confusing for people.
Well, actually, I said that was the last question. No, this is the last question. Why does it have to be so complicated? God, we're talking about 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, this is like 150
well,
shades of grey.
It has to be. It doesn't have to be so complicated at all. It is complicated because the government won't take a decision to make the things that they're calling tax avoidance, tax evasion. It suits them to have it grey. And there's lots and lots of people, and this has been said by some of your other callers, there's lots of people who are big supporters of the government, who benefit from the fact that these things are grey. So
Right.
it suits the government to have it quite grey at the moment. It would be very easy to say all these things that we don't like, we'll just call them tax evasion, we'll change the law. That's what has to be done to simplify it.
Okay, Fergus, thank you very much indeed. You did a very good job of trying to simplify it for us this morning, but it is, by its very nature, complicated, absolutely. Going to speak to Ian and Ron in just a second, but let's just look at the text. Alan Glasgow, I have a regular job and I pay whatever tax the law requires. However, when I see the scroungers, wasters and losers who benefit from my taxes, it really grates. Nothing wrong with paying the minimum that the law requires. Kath says, I avoid tax. I pay into a pension fund, not a lot, but I get tax relief for it. My mum has an ISA, it avoids tax. So maybe we do all avoid tax legally. Another one here is an industry established to help people and families minimise and avoid tax. They're called independent financial advisors, and we are regularly encouraged by governments, banks and our employers to seek this advice. Funnily enough, I think we've got one on the line, but 0500 92 95 00 is the number to call. Ian Cairns, good morning to you.
Good morning, Kaye.
Good morning. You are an independent financial advisor, are you?
Well, yes, I'm actually a financial advisor now because I took the decision in my business not to offer sort of complicated tax avoidance products.
Right.
So because of that, you can't legally call yourself independent anymore. I'm restricted. So I offer whole market products, but I restrict myself into the types of schemes, etc., that I'll advise my clients to go into. So, so an advisor that offers advice on things like that, yeah.
I mean, I'm not levelling any accusations at you, but I'm just picking up on this text again, which says, you know, this is an industry that has been established to help people and families minimise and avoid tax. So is that the business of your industry, to help people keep their tax to a minimum?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. I mean, my business is based in a small town called Dunoon, and the majority of my clients are just normal working families, and I take a bit of exception to, I think it was Fergus you call it was saying that the vanilla end of tax avoidance is ISAs and pensions, etc. I think a lot of people like my clients would be sort of, surprised thinking that they are somehow in the same position as these super wealthy that are putting money in Swiss bank accounts, meeting their Swiss banker in the middle of London with bags full of cash to avoid the tax system. These ISAs and pensions are tax breaks for people to encourage you to save. There's initiatives like the ISA. It's a small amount, relatively small. It used to be £3,000, £7,000 you could save into. It's now £15,000. But these are relatively small amounts compared to, what you're talking about, these super rich doing.
But does the amount make a difference? Does it matter how much?
Yes, it does, because all it comes down to is a proportion of how much tax you pay on a proportion of your overall income. And the thing is that, normal people that maybe work for a local authority or, work in a job for an employer will pay, a high percentage of tax. Someone on £50,000 will pay, well over 40%, will pay, going into the 40% tax bracket. They'll also have national insurance, etc. So they'll pay a high proportion of their income to HMRC. Now, it's right for these people to have breaks to encourage them to save, to say, well, yes, you can put away money for your future and we won't tax you on that as well. But they still pay quite a high proportion of tax on their overall income. The people that are in this higher bracket, the super rich, etc., can afford very elaborate accountancy firms, very elaborate schemes to avoid it. And as a percentage of their income, it's probably far less that they pay in tax compared to the normal person. And it does come down to that. I know Robert McAlpine and his work with the Commonweal is absolutely excellent. And there is this disconnect between our elected politicians and the ordinary people. Not everyone, though. I mean, Kevin Spacey had a quote, and it goes down to paying tax. He says, if you're lucky enough to be successful, then it's your responsibility to send the elevator back down. And that's what it comes down to ultimately. We do have a responsibility to pay tax, but you can minimise it if you are doing it legally. But I wouldn't put putting in money into ISAs or pensions in the same bracket as having Swiss bank accounts or elaborate, tax affairs.
Sure. Ian, thanks very much. Some really good points raised there, and that proportion of the income that you would give in tax to the Exchequer is obviously a key one for people. Lots of stuff to talk about. 0500 92 95 00. Is it okay to seek to minimise your tax liability? Is it a different story if you're operating in the kind of normal bands of income that most of us do than from when you're in this super rich bracket? And I think it was Stephen who introduced this notion of once people do get into, and the mark that he gave was like 300,000 and above kind of mark, you lose touch with people who are leading more kind of regular lives. And he certainly wouldn't like to see anyone in Parliament who is earning more than that amount of money, because he just thinks they're disconnected. There's no way that they can relate to the lives of the people that they seek to represent. So your thoughts on all of that? 0500 92 95 00 is